The fluorescent lights of Morrison Hardware hummed their steady rhythm overhead as James Robinson ran his calloused palm along the edge of a 2x4, checking for warp the way his father had taught him 30 years ago in this same store. The grain told stories if you knew how to listen. This piece was straight and true, perfect for the platform Sarah had been asking about since spring. Sawdust still clung to his Carhartt work pants from the morning's job at the Henderson Restoration, the kind of honest dirt that came from actual labor, not a corporate desk. Sarah tugged his sleeve. 7 years of boundless energy packed into 60 pounds of determination, her hair in 2 careful braids he'd learned to weave from YouTube tutorials after Jennifer died. The gap between her front teeth showed when she smiled, which was often despite everything. Her mother's smile, his stubborn chin. "Daddy, I found the purple paint. Can we use it for the treehouse?" James glanced at his daughter, fighting the response that always won when she lit up like this. The treehouse had been their project since June, something to fill the silence that still echoed through rooms where Jennifer's laughter used to live. 2 years since cancer took her. 730 days of learning to be both parents at once. Purple might clash with the cedar, baby girl, but we'll take a look. Sarah bounced toward the paint aisle, her sneakers squeaking on the concrete floor. James turned back to his measurements, pencil behind his ear, the phoenix tattoo on his left wrist catching afternoon light through the high windows. He tugged his sleeve down out of habit. Some marks weren't meant for casual explanation, especially not to second graders asking uncomfortable questions at school. The design had been sketched on a coffee shop napkin when he was 26 and stupid enough to believe matching tattoos meant forever. Elizabeth's idea back then. 2 phoenixes learning to fly together, wings spread despite the breaks. They'd gotten them inked the same day, drunk on cheap wine and cheaper promises about conquering distance and ambition. Then she'd left for New York with an executive position she couldn't refuse, and assurances that dissolved like sugar in rain. 3 weeks later, she'd stopped answering calls, blocked his number, vanished so completely it was like she'd never existed beyond the mark on his skin. James had done what people do. He'd grieved, moved on, met Jennifer at a community woodworking class where she'd spent 3 hours asking intelligent questions about dovetail joints. She'd been steady where Elizabeth was storm, present where Elizabeth was always half gone. They'd built something real, a daughter, a home, 6 years of the kind of love that didn't need dramatics to prove itself. The memory of Jennifer's last months still cut deep. The way she'd refused bitterness, even when her body betrayed her. How she'd made him promise to keep living after she was gone, to not let grief turn him into a ghost haunting his own house. He'd kept that promise mostly. Got up every morning, fed Sarah, ran the workshop, built things with his hands because that's what Robinson men did. They made something useful from raw materials, something that lasted. James marked the board with a carpenter's pencil, muscle memory guiding the lines straight and true. The hardware store's familiar smells wrapped around him, fresh lumber, motor oil, the metallic tang of new tools, safe territory, predictable. A small voice cut through the ambient noise of shopping carts and overhead announcements, clear and curious in a way that made the back of his neck prickle. "Excuse me, sir. My mother has a tattoo just like yours." The world narrowed to a pinpoint. The pencil slipped from James's fingers. The box of deck screws he'd been holding hit the floor, ball bearings scattering across concrete in a sound like his thoughts breaking apart. He turned slowly, the way you move when you're not sure you want to see what's behind you. A girl stood 3 feet away, maybe 9 years old, in a navy dress with a white Peter Pan collar that screamed private school and trust funds. Patent leather shoes caught the fluorescent light. A velvet headband held back dark curls that escaped in careful disarray, the kind of styled imperfection that cost money to achieve. But her eyes. God, her eyes were the exact shape as the ones he stared past every morning in the mirror. Not the color, hers were brown where his were hazel, but the architecture underneath, the way they tilted slightly at the outer corners, the directness of her gaze, like she'd already decided he was safe enough to approach. She pointed at his wrist where his sleeve had ridden up during the motion of turning. Her finger, small and precise, aimed directly at the phoenix. My mother has the same one on her shoulder. She never shows anyone, but I saw it once when she was changing. She told me it was from a long time ago, from someone important. James's brain scrambled to process the impossible. The tattoo wasn't from any shop pattern book. It was original, drawn by 2 people who thought they were building something permanent. Only 2 existed in the world, his and hers. The girl tilted her head, waiting for a response he couldn't form. She had the careful posture someone had taught her. That presentation mattered. Shoulders back, chin level, but underneath the polish, something vulnerable leaked through. The universal look of childhood loneliness that transcended tax brackets. Sarah appeared at his elbow, curiosity overriding stranger danger. "Hi, I'm Sarah. That's a really pretty dress. Do you go to St. Catherine's?" The girl's attention shifted, her formal composure cracking slightly. "I'm Emily. I go to Riverside Academy. We don't have recess anymore. They call it structured outdoor time." Sarah wrinkled her nose. "That sounds boring. We have actual recess with swings and everything." Someone dropped a paint can 3 aisles over. The clatter sharp in the Cathedral of Commerce and weekend projects. James felt time slow down in that peculiar way it does before everything changes, like the moment between lightning and thunder when you know the strike is coming but haven't felt it yet. Footsteps approached, rapid and urgent. Expensive heels clicked in unmistakable rhythm against linoleum. Sharp, precise, the sound of someone who'd learned to move with purpose through rooms full of people who measured worth in zeros. "Emily, Emily, where did you—" The voice cut off mid-sentence. James knew it before he turned. Some sounds burrow into your bones and wait there dormant until circumstance resurrects them. He'd spent a decade burying this particular frequency, and now it rose from the grave fully formed, dragging every memory he thought safely dead. He turned slowly, each degree of rotation an exercise in controlled demolition. 10 years had refined Elizabeth's sharp edges into something almost dangerous. The struggling art student with paint-stained fingers had become a woman in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than his truck's last service. Her dark hair, once long enough to tangle in his fingers, was cut in a severe bob that framed cheekbones he'd traced with reverent hands in a different lifetime. But her eyes hadn't changed. Still that particular shade of gray that reminded him of October skies before rain, the kind of weather that made you want to stay inside with someone warm. Right now, those eyes were wide, with something between recognition and terror, trapped in the moment where past and present collided with the force of inevitability. James. His name left her lips like a confession, like a curse, like the final word of a prayer she'd been reciting for a decade without knowing how it ended. Elizabeth. Tasting her name after 10 years of not speaking, it felt like touching a scar that had never properly healed. The air between them turned thick and hard to breathe, charged with everything they'd done to each other in the name of love and self-preservation. Sarah pressed closer to his side, confused by the tension she could sense, but not name. Emily looked between them, her small face creased with the kind of worry children get when they sense adult complications beyond their comprehension. Elizabeth recovered first, features smoothing into a mask of polite distance that probably served her well in boardrooms and charity galas. "I apologize. We need to leave now." But Emily was looking at the tattoo again, then at her mother, then back to James with the dawning wonder of a child piecing together a puzzle adults thought they'd hidden. "Is he the one from your story? The one about the phoenix who found another phoenix and they learned to fly together before the storm came?" Elizabeth's face went pale under her expensive foundation. James felt something crack inside his chest, a structural failure he couldn't name. What story? But Elizabeth was already taking Emily's hand, already turning toward the exit with the desperate grace of someone fleeing a crime scene. "I'm sorry. We have to go. I'm sorry." She moved toward the door, pulling Emily along, but the girl looked back over her shoulder. James saw it clearly now in the afternoon light. The shape of her nose was his, the way her eyebrows arched when she was curious, the stubborn set of her jaw that he recognized from every mirror he'd ever faced. Sarah's voice was small beside him. "Dad, who was that lady? Why did she run away?" James couldn't answer. He was too busy calculating months, counting backward, remembering the last night he'd spent with Elizabeth before she disappeared. The hotel room neither of them could really afford, rain against windows, promises they'd made about calling, about making it work despite the distance, about love being enough. 9 months. Emily was 9 years old. The math was simple. The implications were apocalyptic. James moved through the next 3 days in a fog thick enough to drown in. His hands performed familiar tasks, measuring, cutting, sanding, while his mind spun in useless circles that led nowhere but back to that moment in the hardware store, the way Elizabeth had looked at him, not with the hatred of an ex-lover or the indifference of true distance, but with something that looked remarkably like grief, mixed with fear, and Emily. Sweet, careful Emily, with her private school posture and her mother's eyes and his jawline, asking about phoenixes learning to fly. The custom cabinet project he'd promised for the Henderson renovation kept defeating him. Measurements he could normally make in his sleep came out wrong twice, then 3 times. Robert Garcia, his 60-year-old shop assistant who'd worked with James's father before him, finally set down his router and crossed his arms. "You going to tell me what's eating you, or we going to keep wasting good walnut until you get your head straight?" James stared at the board he'd just cut a 1/4 inch short. In 15 years of professional woodworking, he'd never made such a careless mistake. "Just tired." Robert's expression said he didn't believe it for a second, but he'd been around enough to know when to push and when to let a man work through his own demons. Tired doesn't make you measure twice and cut wrong, but it's your call. The problem was the not knowing. If Emily was his daughter, and every cell in his body screamed that she was, why had Elizabeth kept it secret? Why disappear completely instead of telling him? He'd loved her once, loved her with the kind of intensity that feels like drowning and flying simultaneously. When she'd left for that prestigious position, he'd offered to follow. She'd said no, said his life was here, his family's business was here. She couldn't ask him to abandon roots that ran 3 generations deep. 3 weeks later, the silence, complete and absolute, like she'd been erased from existence. He'd grieved, he'd moved on, he'd met Jennifer and built something real, something that lasted until cancer decided 6 years was enough. Now this. Monday night found him alone in the workshop after Sarah had gone to bed, sitting on the floor with an unfinished drawer in his lap, and tears he hadn't realized he was crying, sliding down his face. The smell of cedar and old varnish wrapped around him, familiar as breathing. The door creaked. Sarah stood in her pajamas, 7 years old, and already wise enough to know when silence was the only gift that mattered. She climbed into his lap, without asking, fitting herself against his chest the way she had since she was small enough to cradle in one arm. They sat like that for a long time, his arms around his daughter, while the weight of another daughter, a daughter he'd never known existed, pressed down on him with the force of lost years and stolen moments. Finally, Sarah spoke. "I like that girl, Emily." She seemed lonely. James's throat was too tight for words. He just nodded against her hair. "Do you think we'll see her again?" The question hung in the air between hope and heartbreak. "I don't know, baby." Sarah leaned back to look at him, her green eyes, Jennifer's eyes, serious in a way that made her look older than 7. "I hope so. I've always wanted a sister." The words hit him like a physical blow. He had to close his eyes against the surge of emotion, against the impossible truth that Sarah couldn't know but somehow sensed anyway. Children had a way of seeing what adults tried to hide, and Sarah had always been particularly perceptive. "Life doesn't always give us what we want, kiddo." Sarah settled back against his chest, her voice thoughtful in the darkness. "Mommy used to say that sometimes life gives us what we need instead, but we have to be brave enough to see it." James held his daughter tighter, Jennifer's wisdom coming back through Sarah's voice like a message from beyond the grave. Maybe his late wife had known something he didn't. Maybe she'd known all along that the past never stays buried, no matter how deep you dig. The discovery came accidentally on Saturday morning. James was at the farmer's market with Sarah, buying heirloom tomatoes for the sauce Jennifer had taught him to make. The one recipe he'd managed to master after her death, because it felt like keeping a piece of her alive. Sarah examined the vegetables with the seriousness of a professional chef, which made the vendor smile. She'd inherited her mother's attention to detail, the ability to spot quality that most people missed. "Dad, how do you know which ones are ripe?" James picked up a Cherokee purple, feeling its weight, checking the give near the stem. "You look for even color, no soft spots. Feel the weight, should be heavy for its size. And smell here, near the top, should smell like summer, like earth and sunshine." Sarah pressed her nose to a tomato and grinned. "It does smell like summer." James ruffled her hair, grateful for these simple moments that felt almost normal. Then he saw her. Elizabeth in jeans and a simple white shirt that probably still cost more than his entire outfit, examining vegetables with the same intense focus she used to apply to her paintings. No Emily in sight, just Elizabeth alone in the Saturday morning crowd, looking almost human instead of the polished CEO from the hardware store. James's feet were moving before his brain caught up. "Sarah, go look at those pastries for a second, okay? Pick one out for later." He pressed a $10 bill into her hand and watched her bounce toward the bakery stall before turning back to where Elizabeth stood, frozen by the tomatoes, her eyes closed like she was praying for a different outcome. "We need to talk." Elizabeth's eyes opened. The grief in them was old, calcified into something permanent. "There's nothing to talk about." Her voice was steady, but her hands shook as she placed a tomato back in its basket. "James, please, just let this go." The words came out sharper than he intended, and an elderly woman at the next stall glanced over with interest. "Let it go?" "Elizabeth, she looks exactly like me." "Exactly. And you run away the second we meet. You don't think I deserve an explanation?" Elizabeth's face was a mask, but he saw the muscles in her jaw working, the tell she'd always had when trying not to cry. "What do you want me to say?" James wanted to grab her shoulders, shake her, make her look at him properly. Instead, he kept his hands at his sides, fisted so tight his nails bit into palms. "I want you to tell me the truth. Is Emily mine?" The question hung between them like smoke. For a moment, James thought she might actually answer. Then her expression shuddered completely, and when she spoke, her voice carried the flat affect of someone reciting lines. "No, she's not. And even if she were, what difference would it make? You have your life, James. I have mine. We're strangers who happen to shop at the same farmer's market. That's all." She moved to walk past him, but James stepped into her path, desperate. "The tattoo, Elizabeth. Emily knows about the tattoo. She told me you told her a story about phoenixes learning to fly together." Something cracked in Elizabeth's facade just for a second, a flash of such raw pain that James physically felt it. "I need you to leave us alone." Her voice was breaking now, the careful control dissolving. "Please, James, I'm begging you. You don't understand what's at stake here." Before he could respond, Sarah's voice rang out, bright and clear. "Dad, Dad, look who I found." James's heart stopped. Sarah was walking toward them hand in hand with Emily, both girls carrying paper bags of pastries and wearing matching grins that spoke of instant friendship, the kind of recognition that happens when souls know each other before brains catch up. "Emily, I can't believe you're here. Mrs. Wilson brought her to get bread. Can she come play at our house, please?" Emily was looking up at Elizabeth with such hopeful eyes that James felt his chest constrict. "Mother, can I? Sarah says they're building a treehouse, and I could help." Elizabeth looked between the two girls, and James watched 10 years of carefully constructed walls crumble in real time. Her shoulders sagged, her breath came shorter. When she met his eyes, he saw surrender there, mixed with terror and something that might have been relief. "1 hour. You can visit for 1 hour, and then Mrs. Wilson comes to get you." Emily let out a whoop of delight that sounded so much like Sarah it was almost painful. As the girls ran ahead toward James's truck, chattering about tree houses and whether pink or purple paint was better, Elizabeth grabbed his arm. Her fingers were cold, even in the warm morning. "James, She stopped, swallowed hard, tried again. "There are things you don't know, things I can't explain. But please, please be careful with her. She's fragile, more than she seems." James studied her face, seeing the shadows under her eyes, the fine lines that hadn't been there a decade ago, the weight of secrets that had carved themselves into her features. "I need to know the truth, Elizabeth. Whatever it is, whatever happened, I need to know." She held his gaze for a long moment. He saw her warring with herself, saw the moment she made a decision. She pulled out a business card, thick, expensive cardstock that read Elizabeth Hayes, CEO, Hayes Foundation, and wrote an address on the back. 8 o'clock tonight. Come alone. I'll tell you everything. The hour with the girls was simultaneously wonderful and agonizing. Sarah and Emily clicked immediately, their laughter filling the backyard as they helped James measure lumber for the treehouse platform he'd been building since spring. The structure was already taking shape. A solid deck, 12 feet up in the old oak, rope ladder dangling, pulley system for lifting supplies. Emily had clearly never used a hammer before, but she approached each nail with the serious concentration of someone used to mastering difficult things through sheer determination. She asked careful questions about measurements and weight distribution, her vocabulary far more advanced than Sarah's. Why do the support beams need to be exactly 16 inches apart? James knelt beside her, showing her how the spacing worked. Because the plywood sheets we'll use for the floor are 4 feet wide. 4 feet divided by 3 spaces equals 16 inches. It's the perfect distance to distribute weight evenly without wasting material. Emily's eyes lit up with the kind of excitement that came from understanding how things fit together, how math became real in the world of hammers and nails. That's elegant, like how violin strings are tuned in perfect fifths because of harmonic resonance. James had no idea what harmonic resonance meant in musical terms, but he recognized the intellectual hunger behind the comparison. This girl who'd grown up with everything money could buy was starving for something else entirely. Connection, purpose, the satisfaction of making something with her own hands. Sarah showed Emily how to draw plans in the dirt with a stick, and Emily's face lit up with unguarded joy. The expensive polish was fading with each passing minute. Sawdust in her carefully styled hair, dirt on her patent leather shoes, grass stains on the navy dress that probably cost more than James made in a day. James watched them together and felt something fundamental shift in his chest. They could be sisters. They moved the same, tilted their heads at the same angle when thinking. Sarah's coloring came from Jennifer, that auburn hair and fair skin, while Emily was darker like Elizabeth. But underneath the surface differences, the architecture was identical. The shape of their hands, the way they both bit their lower lip when concentrating, the stubborn set of their shoulders when they decided something mattered. When Margaret Wilson arrived, a stern-looking woman in her 60s who introduced herself with the warmth of a prison warden and shot James a look that said she'd memorized his face for a future police lineup, Emily hugged Sarah goodbye with the fierce desperation of someone who'd found water in a desert and was being forced to leave it behind. "Can we do this again?" The hope in her voice when she looked between Sarah and James made something in his chest crack open. Sarah answered before James could. "Yes, tomorrow. We can work on the treehouse every day until it's done." Emily's smile could have lit cities. The address Elizabeth had given him led to a neighborhood James had only ever driven through on his way to somewhere else. The kind of place where houses hid behind stone walls and ancient trees, where money wasn't flaunted because it didn't need to be. Old money, generational wealth that predated his grandfather's woodworking business by a century or more. The gate opened at his approach, clearly expecting him. James followed a winding drive through manicured gardens that probably required a full-time staff to maintain, past fountains and sculptures that belonged in museums. The house itself was a modern masterpiece of glass and steel, all clean lines and soaring spaces that seemed designed to make visitors feel small. This wasn't just successful executive money. This was something else entirely. Inheritance, trust funds, the kind of wealth that came with responsibilities and complications James couldn't begin to imagine. Elizabeth answered the door herself, barefoot in jeans and an oversized sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders in a way that made James's chest ache with sense memory. She looked younger like this, closer to the girl he'd known, the one who'd laugh until she couldn't breathe and paint until dawn, and talk about changing the world through art. "Come in." She stepped aside to let him enter a foyer that was more gallery than home. Soaring ceilings, carefully curated paintings, sculpture that probably cost more than his house. Everything tasteful, expensive, perfect, and somehow completely soulless. Emily's asleep. Her room's on the 3rd floor. She won't hear us. She led him through the house to a study, lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, poured them both whiskey from a crystal decanter without asking if he wanted it, and handed him a glass with shaking hands. They stood like that for a moment, not quite facing each other, while the weight of 10 years pressed down on the space between them. Outside, crickets sang their evening song. Inside, the silence was heavy enough to crush. Elizabeth spoke first, her voice flat with the careful control of someone who'd rehearsed this speech in mirrors and empty rooms. Her name is Emily Hayes. She's 9 years old. She was born on March 14th at Presbyterian Hospital in New York City. She likes art and mathematics, plays violin at a pre-conservatory level, speaks 3 languages, and has never had a birthday party with more than 2 other children present. She paused, took a long drink of whiskey, and continued. She's also never met her father, has no idea who he is, and I've spent 9 years making sure it stays that way. The words were meant to hurt, and they did. James pushed past the pain to the only question that mattered. Why? Elizabeth finally turned to face him, and the raw anguish in her expression made him take an involuntary step forward. Because telling you would have destroyed everything you had. Because I left to give you a chance at a real life, not the half-existence I could offer you. She set down her glass and wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking very small in the oversized sweater. I found out I was pregnant 3 weeks after I left. I was in New York starting the executive job, and I took a test in a convenience store bathroom at 2 in the morning because I couldn't sleep and kept throwing up and couldn't keep pretending it was stress. Her voice cracked. She paused to collect herself. I sat on that dirty floor with the plastic stick in my hand, and I thought about calling you. God, James, I thought about it for days. I had my phone out 100 times. But then I did what I always do. I researched. I looked you up online, checked your social media, and that's when I saw it. She met his eyes, and hers were swimming. You were engaged to Jennifer. You'd posted photos from a dinner where you proposed. You looked so happy, James, so fundamentally at peace in a way you never looked with me. James felt like the floor had dropped away. You were pregnant with my child, and you didn't tell me because I'd moved on. The anger in his voice was sharp, but underneath it was something much more complicated. Elizabeth laughed, but it was bitter. Not just moved on. You'd found what you needed. Jennifer was, God, even in those photos, I could see she was steady, present, everything I wasn't. I was chaos, James. I was ambition and restlessness. I would have pulled you away from your family, your business, everything that grounded you. And for what? A relationship that was already falling apart before I left. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. I loved you enough to let you be happy, even if it meant raising our daughter alone. The silence that followed was heavy with all the different futures that had died that day in a New York bathroom. James's voice, when he finally found it, was rough. You didn't just decide for yourself, Elizabeth. You decided for me, for Emily. You took away my choice. She nodded slowly. I know, and I've lived with that guilt every single day. But, James, you need to understand, I didn't just disappear. I came from money, old money that my family had been managing for generations. When my father died 6 months after Emily was born, I inherited the Hayes Foundation. Millions of dollars, property, investments, all of it tied up in trusts and legal structures that would have made co-parenting a nightmare. She turned to face him fully now, and he saw the exhaustion carved into her features. I wasn't just some executive who got lucky with the job. I was a trust fund kid trying to build something on my own before the money swallowed me. And when it did, when I became Emily's only parent and sole heir to everything my family had built, I made a choice. I built walls. I kept her safe. I kept her private. And I told myself that giving you up was the price of that safety. James sat down, his untouched whiskey trembling in his hands. Did Jennifer know? Elizabeth shook her head. How would she? I made sure every trace of my pregnancy disappeared, used my mother's maiden name at the hospital, had the birth registered under a different surname initially, changed it legally when Emily was 6 months old. I was thorough, James, ruthlessly thorough. She paused, then added softly, I'm sorry about Jennifer. I read about it online. I thought about reaching out then, but what? You thought I'd had enough suffering? Didn't need to know I had another daughter? The words came out harsher than he'd intended. He saw Elizabeth flinch. I thought you deserved to grieve in peace. I thought adding this truth would only multiply the pain. That wasn't your call to make. But his anger was fading now, replaced by something more complex. Grief for all the moments he'd missed, mixed with understanding he didn't want to feel. He thought about those years with Jennifer, how complete they'd seemed, how Sarah's arrival had felt like the perfect fulfillment of their family. If Elizabeth had told him about Emily then, what would he have done? Left his pregnant wife? Split his time between two families? The scenarios played out in his head, and none of them ended well. Maybe Elizabeth had been right. Maybe her silence had been a strange kind of gift, allowing him to love Jennifer and Sarah without the complication of divided loyalties. But now Jennifer was gone, and the secret had found its way to light anyway, and James couldn't decide if this was fate or just terrible timing. Why didn't you tell me when Jennifer died? You had 2 years. 2 years were telling me wouldn't have destroyed an existing family. Elizabeth's face crumpled. Because by then I was terrified you'd hate me, terrified you'd take Emily away, terrified she'd hate me for keeping you from her. I'd built this entire life on the story that her father was a brief relationship that didn't work out, that he didn't know about her and was happier that way. She was crying now, tears streaming down her face unchecked. I told her he was a good man who loved building things, who had kind hands, and would have loved her if he'd known she existed, but that sometimes adults make choices they can't undo. Her voice broke completely. I told her about the tattoos, showed her mine, told her somewhere in the world was a person with the matching one who carried a piece of her in his heart, even though he didn't know it. It was the only truth I could give her. James moved without thinking, crossing the space between them and pulling her into his arms. She collapsed against him, 10 years of held tears finally breaking free. He held her while she shook with the force of them, and he was crying too, silent tears for everything they'd lost and everything they'd done to each other in the name of love. They stood like that for a long time, two people who'd tried to protect each other in the worst possible ways, while upstairs a child slept who was proof that some secrets are too big to stay buried. When Elizabeth finally pulled back, her face was blotchy, and her eyes were red, and she looked more real than she had in 10 years. What do we do now? James wiped his own face with the back of his hand and took a shaky breath. Now you tell me everything, every birthday I missed, every milestone, every word she said and step she took. You tell me about her. Really tell me, and then we figure out how to be honest with her together. Elizabeth nodded slowly, relief and terror warring on her face. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands, scrolling to photos she'd kept locked in encrypted folders for 9 years. Baby pictures she'd never posted anywhere. Memories too precious and too painful to share. She asks about you, about her father. She has this fantasy that you're out there somewhere, that someday you'll find each other and it'll be like a fairy tale. I've tried to prepare her for disappointment, but she's so hopeful, James. She's got your stubbornness and my dreaming, and it's this heartbreaking combination of wanting the impossible and believing she can make it happen through sheer force of will. James felt something fierce and protective surge through him. Tell me. So she did. They sat on the floor of that expensive study, backs against a leather couch that probably cost more than James's truck, and Elizabeth told him about the daughter he'd never known. Emily was born 3 weeks early during a thunderstorm that knocked out power in half of Manhattan. Elizabeth labored alone, except for a nurse who held her hand through contractions. No family present because she'd told them she was traveling for work. The baby came out screaming, with her fists raised, like she was ready to fight the world. 6 pounds, 4 ounces of fury and determination. The first 3 months were hell. Emily had colic that no amount of rocking or formula adjustments could touch. She'd scream for hours, inconsolable, until Elizabeth learned that humming, just the constant vibration of sound, would calm her enough to sleep. So Elizabeth hummed until her throat was raw, until the building superintendent complained about the noise at 3 in the morning, until she could barely speak above a whisper during the day. Emily's first word was more because she was always hungry for everything. More food, more books, more music, more life crammed into each waking moment. At 3, she conducted an invisible orchestra with a wooden spoon, so serious about it that Elizabeth found her a real violin teacher. The woman declared the child had perfect pitch and refused payment for the first year of lessons, insisting it was an honor to teach someone with such natural talent. At 5, Emily was reading chapter books and asking questions about death and infinity that Elizabeth had no idea how to answer. Where do we go when we die? What's at the edge of the universe? If time is infinite, does that mean everything that can happen will happen? Elizabeth showed James photos on her phone. Emily at 6 months, gummy smile, and Elizabeth's dark hair already thick. Emily at 2, covered in finger paints and delighted by the mess. Emily at 4, standing on a box to reach her violin, bow held with the concentration of a surgeon. At 7, she started asking why she didn't have a dad, like other kids at school. I told her the truth as gently as I could, that her father was a good man who didn't know she existed, that circumstances had kept us apart, that it wasn't about her being unwanted. James's voice came out strangled. What did she say? Elizabeth's hands trembled as she scrolled through more photos. She asked if she could meet you someday. I told her maybe, when she was older. She accepted that. But then the nightmares started. Dreams about being forgotten, about searching for someone who didn't exist. She'd wake up crying for a father she'd never met, and I'd hold her and feel the weight of every lie I'd ever told crushing my chest. The loneliness was what broke Elizabeth's heart most. Despite the money for private schools and tutors and every opportunity, Emily was isolated. The other wealthy kids sensed she was different, a foundation heiress being raised by a single mother in a world where lineage and traditional families still mattered. Their parents whispered at pickup, speculation about the Hayes heir's mysterious origins. Emily learned early to build walls around herself, let very few people in, trust even fewer. James listened to 9 years compressed into hours, his daughter's entire childhood delivered in fragments and photos, and Elizabeth's guilt-soaked memories. By the time she finished, it was past midnight, and he felt like he'd lived a parallel life he'd been robbed of experiencing in real time. I want to tell her. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but soon. She deserves to know. Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment, fear and resignation playing across her features. Sarah deserves to know too. They already love each other. I could see it today in your backyard. Maybe they knew before we did. James thought about Sarah's comment about always wanting a sister, about Emily's desperate hug, goodbye, about how right they'd looked standing side by side, measuring lumber for a treehouse that didn't yet exist except in their shared imagination. They're sisters. However we got here, whatever we did wrong, they're sisters, and they should get to be sisters." Elizabeth nodded, something loosening in her shoulders like she'd been holding her breath for 9 years and could finally exhale. "How do we do this? Carefully, honestly, together." The word felt strange in his mouth. Together applied to him and Elizabeth after a decade of determined separation, but they were bound now by something stronger than old romance or ancient hurt. They were bound by Emily, by Sarah, by the recognition that two children deserved better than the mess their parents had made. Over the next 2 weeks, James and Elizabeth navigated an impossible situation with the delicacy of people diffusing a bomb made of their own mistakes. They met for coffee while the girls were at school. Neutral cafes, where neither could break down without witnesses, where conversation stayed measured even when emotions ran hot. The first meeting was Tuesday morning at a diner off Route 32, halfway between James's workshop and the Hayes Foundation offices. Elizabeth arrived in a power suit, James in work clothes with sawdust still caught in the creases of his boots. They sat across from each other like diplomats from warring nations negotiating a fragile peace. Emily asked about Sarah 3 times yesterday. She wants to know when she can come back. James stirred sugar into coffee he didn't want. Sarah drew a picture of her and Emily in the treehouse. Put it on the fridge next to her spelling test. She's never mentioned wanting a friend this much. Elizabeth's fingers drummed against her cup, a nervous habit he remembered from their past. We can't keep having supervised playdates without explaining why. Kids aren't stupid. They'll figure out something's off. So we set a date, pick a day, plan what we'll say, and we tell them. The idea terrified them both. Elizabeth's face went pale, her professional composure cracking to reveal the frightened mother underneath. What if Emily hates me? What if she can't forgive me for lying her whole life? James wanted to offer reassurance he didn't feel, platitudes about children being resilient and love conquering all. Instead, he offered honesty. Maybe she will. Maybe this breaks something between you that can't be fixed. But keeping the secret breaks something too, just slower, over years instead of days. You told me she has nightmares about being forgotten. How much worse will those get when she finds out the truth, and we weren't the ones who told her? The logic was sound, even if it offered no comfort. Elizabeth wrapped both hands around her coffee cup like it could anchor her. I've been running from this for 9 years. Another day won't make me braver. They texted throughout the day after that, short updates that felt both mundane and monumental. Elizabeth sent photos of Emily at violin practice, fingers flying across strings with the precision of someone who'd been training since she could hold the instrument. James sent back pictures of Sarah in his workshop, helping sand a chair leg with the seriousness of an apprentice learning a sacred craft. Wednesday afternoon, Margaret Wilson brought Emily to James's workshop after school. The nanny's expression remained professionally neutral, but James caught her watching him with an intensity that suggested she was cataloging every interaction for some future judgment. Emily wore her school uniform still, navy blazer, pleated skirt, knee socks that were already sliding down from playground activity. She carried her violin case like a security blanket, setting it carefully in the corner before approaching the workbench where James was assembling a bookshelf. What are you making? Custom shelving for a client's library. Oak with dovetail joints. Want to help? Her eyes lit up with an eagerness that reminded James painfully of himself at that age, when his father first let him use real tools instead of toy versions. I don't know how. That's what learning is for. Come here. He showed her how to check if 2 pieces fit flush, how to feel for gaps that the eye might miss. Her hands, small and careful from years of violin training, had the sensitivity required for precision work. When she found a slight misalignment in a joint, Pride flashed across her face, the satisfaction of discovering a problem she could help solve. Sarah burst in 20 minutes later, backpack still on, breathless from running. "Dad, I finished my homework in study hall, so I could come help." "Oh, hi, Emily." The girls gravitated toward each other with the magnetic pull of people who recognized something essential in one another. Sarah dumped her backpack and immediately started explaining the treehouse plans she'd been refining on notebook paper during math class. Emily asked questions about structural integrity and weight distribution. Sarah answered with the practical knowledge she'd absorbed from watching James work since she was old enough to toddle into the workshop. They spoke different languages. Sarah's vocabulary came from hands-on experience, Emily's from books and formal education. But they understood each other perfectly. James watched them measure scrapwood for a scale model, heads bent together over Sarah's sketches, and felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. This was what he'd been robbed of. Not just knowing Emily existed, but watching her grow alongside Sarah. Seeing them become sisters in real time instead of having it thrust upon them after 9 years of separation. Margaret Wilson sat in the corner reading a book, but her attention never strayed far from Emily. Every few minutes, her gaze would flick up, assessing, evaluating. James couldn't tell if she approved or was gathering evidence for some future custody battle. The woman's face revealed nothing except professional vigilance. When the hour was up and Margaret stood to collect Emily, both girls protested. "Can I stay for dinner, please? Sarah says her dad makes really good spaghetti." Elizabeth had been clear about the 1-hour limit, but James found himself looking at Margaret with something like hope. The nanny's expression remained stern, but something flickered in her eyes. Calculation, perhaps, or recognition of the inevitability they were all dancing around. "I'll need to call your mother." She stepped outside, phone pressed to her ear. Through the workshop window, James watched her explain the situation. When she returned, her expression had softened fractionally. "Miss Elizabeth says one dinner won't hurt, but you're to be home by 7:30, and I'll be collecting you personally." The girls celebrated like they'd won a major victory instead of just 3 more hours. James texted Elizabeth a quick thank you for trusting me. Her response came seconds later. "Not sure trust is the right word, but you deserve this." Dinner was chaotic in the best way. Sarah showed Emily how to set the table properly, forks on the left, knife and spoon on the right, while James boiled pasta and heated the sauce he'd made over the weekend. Emily moved through his kitchen with the careful precision of someone used to formal dining, arranging napkins with geometrical exactness. "At home, we have someone who cooks for us. I've never helped make dinner before." Sarah looked scandalized. "You've never cooked? Not even helped? Mother says the kitchen is Mrs. Chen's domain. She gets upset if anyone interferes." James stirred sauce that was filling the kitchen with the smell of garlic and basil and tomatoes that had simmered long enough to achieve perfection. "In this house, everybody helps. That's how families work. Everyone contributes what they can." The word family hung in the air, heavier than he'd intended. Emily went very still, her hands frozen mid-napkin fold. When she looked up, her eyes held a hunger that had nothing to do with food. "Can I learn to cook?" "Sure. Start by getting the salad bowl from that cupboard." They ate at James's scratched kitchen table, instead of the formal dining room he never used, passing garlic bread and grating Parmesan that Emily insisted on doing herself, despite never having used a grater before. She bloodied her knuckle on the 3rd pass, crying out more from surprise than pain. James was there in a second with a clean dish towel and antiseptic. First rule of the kitchen, the grater always wins. Second rule, everyone gets hurt learning. Third rule, you get back up and finish the job. He bandaged her knuckle with the efficiency of someone who'd patched countless workshop injuries. Emily watched his hands with something like wonder. "You're gentle for someone with such big hands. Woodworking teaches you precision. You learn to be gentle with things that matter." Sarah chimed in around a mouthful of pasta. "Dad's really good at fixing things. He fixed my bike last week when the chain came off. He fixed my treehouse measurements today when I calculated the angles wrong." Both girls looked at him with the kind of uncomplicated admiration that made James's throat tight. This was what fatherhood was supposed to feel like, being the person who fixed broken things and taught hard lessons and made spaghetti on Wednesday nights. After dinner, Emily helped wash dishes. She'd clearly never done it before, held the sponge like it might bite her, used too much soap, splashed water everywhere. Sarah found it hilarious and turned it into a game, seeing who could make more bubbles. By the time Margaret arrived at 7:20, both girls were damp and giggling, the kitchen a disaster of soap suds and clean dishes. The nanny stood in the doorway surveying the chaos. For the first time since James had met her, the corners of her mouth twitched upward. "Miss Emily, your mother is going to have opinions about the state of your uniform." Emily looked down at her soap-stained blazer and water-spotted skirt without concern. It was worth it. After they left, Sarah helped James wipe down counters and put away dishes. She was quieter than usual, thoughtful in a way that made him nervous. "Dad?" "Yeah, kiddo. Emily doesn't have anyone to teach her normal stuff, like cooking and fixing bikes and making soap bubbles." James squeezed out the dish rag, buying time to find the right words. "She has her mom. Elizabeth takes good care of her, but she doesn't have a dad. Not like I have you." The observation landed like a punch. Sarah wasn't accusing, wasn't angry, just stating a fact with the clarity of childhood logic. "Some families look different, Sarah. That doesn't make them wrong." "I know, but it makes them lonely." That night, James lay awake thinking about Emily's face when he'd bandaged her knuckle, the way she'd watched him like he was performing magic instead of basic first aid. He thought about Sarah's assessment. Emily doesn't have anyone to teach her normal stuff, and realized his daughter had identified something Elizabeth's millions couldn't buy: the mundane, unglamorous work of daily parenting, the scraped knees and spaghetti dinners and patient explanations of how graders work. Elizabeth called at 11 when she knew Emily would be asleep. Margaret said she had fun. Sarah's already asking when Emily can come back. Silence on the other end waited with everything they weren't saying. Finally, Elizabeth spoke, her voice smaller than he'd ever heard it. "I'm terrified of losing her, James. If we tell her the truth and she chooses you, chooses the normal life you can give her, instead of the gilded cage I've built, I don't know how I'd survive that." James understood the fear because he felt its mirror image. "What if we tell Sarah and she resents having to share me? What if this breaks what we have? So we're both terrified, yeah, but we're doing it anyway." Another long pause, then Elizabeth's laugh, bitter and exhausted. "When did we become brave? I don't think we are. I think we're just out of other options." The playdates continued through September. Emily came to the workshop every Wednesday, then Saturdays too, when Elizabeth tentatively suggested it, and James agreed before he could overthink it. The girls were inseparable during those hours, finishing each other's sentences and developing the kind of shorthand communication that siblings create. They fought sometimes, petty arguments about whose turn it was to pick music or who got to hammer the next nail. James treasured those fights because they were beautifully normal, the ordinary friction of two kids learning to share space and attention. Emily was shedding her expensive polish like a snake shedding skin. Sawdust became a permanent feature in her hair. Her school uniforms acquired grass stains that Margaret clucked over. She stopped worrying about getting dirty, stopped checking if her clothes were perfectly arranged, stopped being quite so careful with everything. One Saturday afternoon, Sarah pushed Emily on the tire swing James had hung from the oak tree. Emily shrieked with laughter, not the polite, controlled giggling of formal occasions, but genuine belly laughs that echoed across the backyard. She pumped her legs, going higher, wind whipping her dark hair, face split in a grin of pure joy. Margaret watched from her usual position on the porch steps. When Emily jumped off mid-swing and landed hard in the grass, scraping both palms, the nanny started to rise. James caught her eye and shook his head fractionally. Let her handle it. Emily examined her bloody palms, lower lip trembling. Sarah was already there with paper towels from the workshop. It's okay. Dad says everyone bleeds when they're learning to fly. James had never said anything of the sort, but the sentiment was sound. Emily let Sarah clean the scrapes, then demanded to go again, higher this time. Margaret settled back onto the steps. When she caught James looking, she gave him the slightest nod. Approval, maybe, or acknowledgement that he was doing something right. James was falling in love with his daughter in increments, the way she bit her lower lip when concentrating on measurements, how she asked a million questions about grain direction and structural engineering, and why some woods were harder than others, her fierce determination to master every task she attempted, whether it was hammering nails or making sandwiches. He noticed himself watching for her arrival on Wednesdays with the same anticipation he felt when Sarah got home from school. Started thinking about her when she wasn't there, wondering if she'd like the bookshelf he was building or if she'd solved the math problem that had stumped her last visit. This was his daughter, the biological reality he'd accepted intellectually on the floor of Elizabeth's study became emotional fact in his workshop, watching her learn to sand with the grain and celebrate when a joint fit perfectly. But with love came fear. What happened when Elizabeth's family lawyers got involved? What if the Hayes Foundation, or whoever they were beyond Elizabeth and Emily, decided James wasn't suitable to be in their heiress's life? What if telling Emily the truth shattered her in ways they couldn't predict or prevent? Week 5 brought the first serious crack in their careful dance. Sarah came home from school on Tuesday with tears streaming down her face and a note from her teacher requesting a parent meeting. James's stomach dropped reading about aggressive behavior toward classmates, talking back to teachers, disruption during reading time. Sarah, his even-tempered daughter, who'd never gotten in trouble beyond forgetting homework, had pushed another girl off the monkey bars. She said I was weird because I don't have a mom. She said her mom told her dad probably can't take care of me right. James pulled Sarah into his arms, fury at small-minded parents warring with concern for his daughter. You know that's not true. I know. But then I thought about Emily and how she doesn't have a dad, and people probably say mean things about her too, and I just got so mad. The connection to Emily gave James pause. Sarah was processing something she didn't have words for yet, acting out feelings she couldn't name. At home that afternoon, Sarah refused to play with her favorite toys. She sat at the kitchen table, drawing angry scribbles in black crayon, while James made her a snack she didn't eat. Why does Emily get to come here so much? The question came out aggressive, challenging. Because she's your friend. I thought you liked having her around. I do. But she's your friend too. You smile different when she's here. James froze in the act of slicing an apple. What do you mean? Sarah's face crumpled. I don't know. Sometimes I want it to be just us again. Like before Mom died. just me and you." The raw honesty of it cut through James's carefully constructed plans. In trying to build a relationship with Emily, he'd made Sarah feel replaced. The very thing he'd feared for Emily, feeling unwanted, he'd inadvertently done to the daughter he'd raised since birth. He sat down across from Sarah, taking her small hands in his larger ones. "Nothing and nobody will ever change how much I love you. You're my Sarah. You held my hand through losing your mom. You taught me how to keep living when I wanted to stop. There is no universe where anyone matters more to me than you do." Sarah sniffled, unconvinced. "But Emily needs you more. She never had a dad. Having another person to care about doesn't divide love, Sarah. It multiplies. My heart doesn't have a limit on how much room it has. That's cheesy, Dad." A small smile broke through her tears. James took it as a victory. "You're right, it is, but it's also true." That night, he texted Elizabeth. "We need to tell them soon. Sarah's starting to figure out something's wrong." Elizabeth's response came an hour later. "Foundation merger collapsed today. Board meeting was brutal. Everything's falling apart anyway. Maybe it's time to stop trying to hold the pieces together." James called her instead of texting back. She answered on the first ring, her voice raw like she'd been crying. "What happened?" "Rumors about Emily's paternity killed the deal. $50 million gone because people started asking questions about the Hayes heir's mysterious origins. My father built that foundation from nothing, and I just watched it implode because I couldn't keep a secret buried. This isn't your fault, isn't it? I made every decision that led here. I could have told you when I found out I was pregnant, could have handled the inheritance differently, could have been honest from the start instead of building this elaborate structure of lies." Marcus heard ice clinking in a glass through the phone. Elizabeth drinking alone in that expensive house, while their daughter slept upstairs, oblivious to the chaos unfolding around her. "So we stop lying. We tell them the truth and deal with whatever comes after. I'm not ready. Neither am I. But we're out of runway, Elizabeth. The plane's going down whether we're ready or not." Thursday afternoon brought another crisis. Emily had a play date at James's house, and Sarah made an offhand comment while they were painting wood scraps for the treehouse. "I wish you were my real sister." Emily froze, paintbrush dripping purple onto newspaper. Her breathing changed, became shallow and rapid. The paintbrush clattered to the ground as her hands started shaking. "Emily, I didn't mean—" But Emily was hyperventilating now, eyes wide and unfocused, caught in something that looked like panic. James had no idea what to do. Sarah was crying, confused and scared. Emily couldn't seem to hear him when he said her name. Margaret was through the door in seconds, like she'd been waiting for exactly this scenario. "Emily, look at me. Breathe with me. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. She guided Emily through breathing exercises with practiced ease, voice calm and steady, until the girl's panic subsided into trembling and tears. When Emily could speak, her voice was small and broken. "I want to go home." Margaret shot James a look that communicated both sympathy and accusation. This is what happens when you disrupt a fragile child's carefully managed world. She gathered Emily's things while James tried to comfort Sarah, who was sobbing that she'd broken something she didn't understand. After they left, he held Sarah until she cried herself into exhausted silence. Then he called Elizabeth. "Emily had an anxiety attack at my house. Sarah said something innocent, and Emily just fell apart." Elizabeth's sharp intake of breath told him she'd been expecting this. "I'm calling Dr. Clark. We need professional help for this." Dr. Laura Clark was a child psychologist who specialized in anxiety disorders and family transitions. She met with Elizabeth and James separately first, then together, asking pointed questions about their plan for disclosure and the support systems in place for both girls. Children are more resilient than we give them credit for, but they need honesty. Emily suspects something. Her anxiety attacks are partly about sensing instability she can't name. Sarah is acting out because she feels the shift in dynamics without understanding it. The longer you wait, the more damage you do to both of them. She gave them a framework. Be honest, but age-appropriate. Answer their questions without overwhelming them with adult complications. Reassure them that they're safe, loved, and not responsible for adult decisions. Tell them together in a neutral space. Let them react however they need to react. Don't try to control their emotions or make them feel better immediately. Just be present and truthful. They set a date, Saturday afternoon, 3 weeks from now. Time to prepare, to plan, to steel themselves for the moment everything changed. Saturday arrived with perfect weather that felt like mockery. Bright sunshine, gentle breeze, temperatures warm enough that James didn't need a jacket when he stood on his front porch at noon, waiting for Elizabeth's car to pull into the driveway. Sarah was inside arranging cookies on a plate she'd insisted they needed, even though nobody would eat them. Nervous energy made her hands shake, dropping one cookie that shattered on the floor. She'd swept up the pieces and replaced it without comment, her face set in the determined expression she got when trying not to cry. Elizabeth's Mercedes appeared at 12:15, 15 minutes late. James watched her sit in the driver's seat for a full minute after parking, gathering courage, or maybe saying goodbye to the version of her life that was about to end. Emily was visible in the back seat, looking confused about why they weren't moving. When they finally emerged, Elizabeth's professional armor was fully deployed. Tailored slacks, silk blouse, hair perfect. But her hands trembled when she smoothed Emily's dress, and James saw the effort it took for her to walk up the porch steps instead of reversing out of the driveway. "We're doing this." Not a question, a statement of fact, like she was trying to convince herself. Together. Sarah opened the door before they could knock, her smile too bright to be genuine. "Hi, Emily. We made cookies." "Well, Dad made them. I just helped." The girls gravitated toward each other with the same magnetic pull as always, but something was different today. Sarah's movements were tighter, more controlled. Emily sensed the tension immediately, her shoulders drawing up in defensive posture. Why is everyone acting weird? Children saw through adult pretense like it was glass. James exchanged a glance with Elizabeth. "No more delays. No more excuses. Let's sit down. We need to talk about something important." The shift in atmosphere was immediate. Both girls' faces closed off, their kid radar detecting serious adult business that usually meant bad news. They sat on the couch side by side, unconsciously presenting a united front against whatever was coming. James's carefully rehearsed opening dissolved in his mouth. He looked at Elizabeth for help, saw the same panic in her eyes. They were supposed to be the adults here, supposed to know what they were doing. Instead, they were two terrified people about to detonate a bomb in the center of their daughters' lives. "Girls, we need to tell you something we should have told you before. Something about our past and about family and about mistakes we made a long time ago." Sarah's eyes went wide. Emily went very still, the way prey animals freeze when they sense danger. Elizabeth picked up where James faltered, her voice shaking despite obvious efforts at control. "A long time ago, before either of you were born, James and I knew each other. We were close, very close. And then I moved away for work, and we lost touch, and life went in different directions." Sarah was doing math in her head, her face scrunching with concentration. Emily had stopped breathing, waiting for whatever was coming with the terrible patience of someone who'd learned young that bad news always arrived eventually. James forced the words out before courage failed completely. "Sarah, you know how you've always said you wished you had a sister." His daughter nodded slowly, eyes never leaving his face. "You do. You have a sister. Emily is your sister." The silence was absolute. Sarah looked at Emily, then at James, then at Elizabeth, her 7-year-old mind working through implications that would take adults weeks to process. Emily had gone pale, her hands gripping the couch cushions like she might fall if she let go. "I don't understand. How can Emily be my sister? She has a different mom." This was the part James had been dreading, the moment where abstract concepts became concrete reality, where he had to explain adult choices to children who deserved better than the mess they'd made. Elizabeth took over, her professional composure finally cracking as she addressed Emily directly. "Honey, do you remember the stories I told you about your father? About the kind man who liked building things?" Emily's voice came out barely above a whisper. "The one who didn't know about me? He's James, Sarah's dad. He's your father, too." The words hung in the air like smoke. Emily's face cycled through confusion, hope, disbelief, and finally a desperate kind of joy that made James's chest feel too small for his heart. She stared at him with eyes that suddenly looked exactly like his own, searching for confirmation that this wasn't some cruel joke. "You're my dad? You're the one from the stories?" James nodded, not trusting his voice. Emily launched herself off the couch and into his arms with the force of 9 years of wanting. She hit his chest hard enough to knock him back a step, her small body shaking with sobs as she clung to him like he might disappear if she loosened her grip. "I knew it. I knew when I saw the tattoo. I knew you were him. Mother, I knew." James caught her, held her, felt his daughter crying against his shirt while his own tears fell into her dark hair. This was his child. The biological reality became visceral truth in the weight of her in his arms, the sound of her voice breaking on the word Dad, the way she fit against him like a piece of a puzzle he hadn't known was incomplete. But Sarah hadn't moved. She sat frozen on the couch, face working through emotions too complex for a 7-year-old to name. Elizabeth started to reach for her, but Sarah pulled back, eyes fixed on James with something that looked like betrayal. "You lied. You all lied." Her voice cracked on the accusation. Emily went still in James's arms, suddenly aware that joy for her meant pain for someone else. Elizabeth tried to explain, words tumbling out in desperate justification. "Sweetheart, it's complicated. Adults made mistakes, and we were trying to protect—" "How long?" Sarah cut her off, still looking at James. "How long did you know about her?" James's throat closed. He'd known this question was coming, had practiced answers that suddenly felt like more lies. "A few weeks." Sarah's face crumpled. "Weeks? You knew for weeks and didn't tell me?" She was off the couch and running before anyone could stop her, footsteps pounding up the stairs, door slamming with the finality of trust breaking. James moved to follow, but Elizabeth caught his arm. "Let me." She headed upstairs while James stood in his living room with Emily still clinging to him, both of them frozen in the wreckage of a moment that was supposed to bring them together, but had instead torn something else apart. Emily pulled back to look at James's face, her joy already dimming as she processed Sarah's reaction. "Does Sarah hate me now?" "No, baby, she doesn't hate you. She's just scared and hurt and doesn't understand yet. Can I call you that?" "Dad?" The question broke him. James cupped her face in his hands, seeing his own features reflected in hers. The nose, the jawline, the stubborn set of her mouth when she was trying not to cry. "You can call me whatever feels right." Dad, James, whatever you want. Dad, I want to call you Dad. She wrapped her arms around him again, but the desperate edge was gone, replaced by uncertainty. They could hear Elizabeth's voice upstairs, murmuring soothing words punctuated by Sarah's angry responses that were too muffled to make out clearly. James sat on the couch with Emily, neither sure what to do with this new reality. She kept touching his arm, his hand, his shoulder, small reassurances that he was real and present and not going to vanish like he had before she was born. "Are you going to leave again?" The fear in her voice cut through him. "I never left, Emily. I didn't know you existed. If I had known, nothing could have kept me away. Mother said you had your own life. That telling you would have made everything complicated." James thought about how to explain adult choices to a 9-year-old without making her mother the villain of the story. "Your mother made a really hard choice because she loved me and wanted me to be happy. She wasn't trying to hurt anyone. Sometimes people do the wrong thing for the right reasons. Is that what grown-ups do? Make everything complicated?" "Yeah, kiddo, we're really good at that." Elizabeth appeared at the top of the stairs, shaking her head. Sarah wasn't ready to come down. James felt the weight of that rejection settle in his chest. His first daughter refusing to see him because he'd been building a relationship with his second daughter in secret. The next hour was stilted and painful. Emily asked 1,000 questions while Sarah stayed upstairs. Could she come visit whenever she wanted? Could she stay overnight sometimes? Was James really going to be her dad now, not just someone who let her use his workshop? James answered each question as honestly as he could, but part of his attention was always on the ceiling, listening for sounds of Sarah moving around, hoping she'd come down and let him explain. When Elizabeth finally said they should go, Emily's face fell. "But we just got here. Can I stay longer? Your dad needs to talk to Sarah. We'll come back soon." The word "dad" in Elizabeth's mouth sounded strange, like she was trying on a new language. Emily hugged James goodbye with the same fierce desperation as before, making him promise 3 times that this was real, that he wasn't going to disappear now that she knew the truth. After they left, James stood at the bottom of the stairs for a long moment, gathering courage to face his daughter's hurt. When he knocked on Sarah's door, silence answered. "Sarah, can I come in?" "No." Her voice was thick with tears, but defiant. James leaned his forehead against the door. "I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. I was scared, and I handled it wrong. You promised. After Mom died, you promised we'd always be honest with each other." The accusation landed like a physical blow because she was right. He'd made that promise during those terrible weeks after Jennifer's funeral when Sarah had nightmares about him disappearing too. He'd sworn he'd always tell her the truth, always be there, always choose her first. And then he'd kept a secret that fundamentally changed her world. "You're right. I broke that promise, and I'm sorry." Silence. Then quietly, "Are you going to love her more than me?" James's heart cracked open. He pressed his palm flat against the door, wishing he could pull Sarah into his arms. "Never. Impossible. You're my Sarah. Having another daughter doesn't make me love you less. Love doesn't divide, it multiplies. There's room for both of you. That's what you said before. But now she's here, and you smile at her the way you used to smile at Mom." The observation was devastating in its accuracy. James had been falling in love with Emily in ways he hadn't consciously registered. Drawn to her quick mind and her hunger to learn, her determination to master whatever she attempted, it didn't replace his love for Sarah, but Sarah couldn't see that distinction yet. "Can I come in, please?" After a long pause, the lock clicked. James opened the door to find Sarah on her bed, face red and splotchy, stuffed elephant from her mother clutched to her chest. She wouldn't look at him. He sat on the edge of the bed, not touching, giving her space to be angry. Emily needs me because she never had a dad. I get that. But I need you too. I know you do, baby. So why does it feel like I'm losing you? James chose his next words carefully, knowing they'd shape how Sarah understood this for years to come. When your mom died, it was just us against the world, you and me. And that felt safe, right? Just the two of us. Nobody else to worry about. Sarah nodded against her elephant. But Sarah, safe isn't the same as good. Your mom wouldn't want us to close ourselves off from other people just because loving them is scary. She'd want us to be brave enough to let our family grow, even if it's messy and complicated. But Emily gets you all the time now, Wednesdays and Saturdays, and dinner that one time. And you get me every other day, every morning and every night, every school pickup and every bedtime story. Sharing me doesn't mean losing me. Sarah finally looked at him, her green eyes swimming. Promise? Promise. You're stuck with me, kiddo, forever. She let him pull her into a hug, but James felt the tension in her shoulders, the way she didn't quite relax against him, the way she used to. Trust had been damaged. It would take more than promises to repair it. The following Tuesday, Marcus got served papers at his workshop. A process server in a cheap suit walked past Robert Garcia and handed James a manila envelope with Hayes Foundation letterhead. Michael Anderson, Elizabeth's uncle, was filing for guardianship review, citing concerns about James's suitability as a parent given his working-class background and lack of resources to maintain Emily's standard of living. Robert found him sitting on the workshop floor, papers scattered around him, too angry to speak. "What's that? Rich people trying to take my daughter away because I'm not rich enough to deserve her." Robert picked up one of the legal documents, squinting at the dense legal language. "You going to fight? With what? I can barely afford a decent lawyer, let alone the kind Elizabeth's family probably has on retainer. So you roll over? Let them win because they have deeper pockets?" James looked at his employee, friend, surrogate uncle, who'd known him since he was Sarah's age, and his father was still teaching him which end of a hammer to hold. "What am I supposed to do? Same thing your dad would do. Stand up and fight for what's yours. Your girl needs you. That's worth more than any trust fund." Elizabeth called that night, furious in a way he'd never heard. "I didn't authorize this. My uncle went behind my back using old family clauses I didn't even know existed. I'm fighting it, James. My lawyers are already drafting responses." Maybe he's right. Maybe Emily deserves better than a workshop and a 2-bedroom house. "Don't you dare." Elizabeth's voice was sharp enough to cut. "Don't let him make you doubt yourself. Emily doesn't need a bigger house. She needs you. She needs someone who teaches her to build things and doesn't care if she gets dirty. Someone who bandages her scrapes and lets her fail without judgment. Money can't buy that." Her voice softened. "I chose wrong 10 years ago. I chose protecting money over protecting love. I'm not making that mistake again." Friday morning, James ran into Margaret Wilson at the grocery store. She approached him in the produce section, a rare occurrence given how carefully she usually maintained professional distance. "Mr. Robinson, I think we should talk." They got coffee at the shop next door, sitting at a corner table where no one could overhear. Margaret folded her hands on the table, meeting his eyes with an intensity that made him nervous. "I've known since Emily was born." James felt the world tilt. "Known what?" "That you're her father. I was Elizabeth's family housekeeper before I became Emily's nanny. I was there the day she came home from the hospital with a newborn. I saw the tattoo when I helped her bathe after the C-section. I heard her cry at night about someone named James and the choice she'd had to make." James couldn't speak. Margaret continued, her stern expression softening fractionally. "I've watched you with my girl these past weeks. You're patient, kind. You teach her things she needs to know. She's happier than I've seen her in years. Comes home with dirt under her fingernails and stories about building things with her hands. That matters." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table. "If Miss Elizabeth loses her nerve, give her this." Inside were copies of baby photos. Emily at the hospital wrapped in a standard-issue blanket, Emily at 3 months, Elizabeth holding her with the exhausted desperation of a new mother navigating alone. A note in Margaret's careful handwriting. "Some secrets protect, some secrets poison. You'll know which this is." "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm retiring in 3 months, and I won't be there to help Emily through what comes next. She needs her father, Mr. Robinson. She's always needed him. I'm giving you ammunition to make sure Elizabeth doesn't back out." The legal battle stretched over 6 weeks. Depositions, character witnesses, home inspections that made James acutely aware of every scuff mark and outdated appliance. Michael Anderson's lawyers painted him as a well-meaning but inadequate father figure, someone who couldn't provide the educational opportunities and social connections Emily would need to manage her eventual inheritance. James's lawyer, Patricia Moore, who'd taken the case pro bono after hearing his story, built a different case. Testimony from Sarah's teachers about James's involved parenting. Dr. Clark's professional opinion that Emily's relationship with James was therapeutic and necessary for her mental health. Character witnesses from neighbors, clients, Father Thomas from the church who'd known James since childhood. And Elizabeth, who spent 3 hours on the stand explaining her choices, defending James's character, and making it crystal clear that she wanted him fully involved in Emily's life, regardless of what her uncle thought about working-class fathers. The hearing was held on a Wednesday morning in a courtroom that smelled like old wood and anxiety. Michael Anderson sat at the plaintiff's table, looking every inch the corporate titan. Silver hair, perfectly styled, suit that cost more than James's monthly mortgage, expression of benevolent concern that didn't reach his eyes. Patricia Moore presented the case methodically. Sarah's principal testified first, describing James as an exemplary parent, involved, supportive, present at every school event. Neighbors spoke about never hearing him raise his voice, about how the girls were always smiling. Father Thomas shared memories of James volunteering at the community center, teaching woodworking to at-risk youth. Dr. Clark's testimony was the turning point. She presented clinical data showing Emily's anxiety attacks had decreased 60% since meeting James, that removing him would cause severe psychological harm, that she needed emotional stability more than financial stability. Then Elizabeth took the stand. 3 hours of testimony defending James, revealing her own mistakes, breaking down when she admitted choosing to protect money over protecting love 10 years ago. When the lawyer asked if she believed James was suitable, her answer was unequivocal. Suitable? He's essential. Lily doesn't need a bigger house or more tutors or society connections. She needs someone who bandages her scrapes without calling a doctor, who teaches her hammers and patience, and that failure is part of learning. She needs a father, and James Robinson is that father. Patricia Moore called Sarah as a surprise witness. The judge was hesitant. She was only 7, but allowed brief testimony. Sarah walked to the stand in her best dress, gap-toothed and brave. "Can you tell the court about your dad?" Sarah's voice was small but steady. "He's the best dad in the world. He makes breakfast every morning, even when he's tired. He learned to braid hair from YouTube. He reads to me every night. And when I pushed a girl at school because she said mean things, he didn't yell. He just held me and said, sometimes anger is hurt in disguise. The lawyer asked one more question. How do you feel about Emily? She's my sister. Dad loves us the same. I know because I tested him, and he never failed. The courtroom was silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing. Michael Anderson's final argument was about Emily's future, the foundation she'd inherit at 18, the preparation she needed, the education and connections only wealth could provide. What can a carpenter teach her about managing $200 million? Patricia Moore's closing was simpler. This court's job isn't protecting a trust fund, it's protecting a child. And that child needs her father more than she needs another investment portfolio. The judge ruled quickly, almost impatiently. DNA testing required to establish paternity legally, then joint custody. 40% with James, 60% with Elizabeth, due to school district. Michael Anderson's objections dismissed. Emily would be Emily Hayes Robinson, hyphenated proof that two families could become one. Outside the courthouse, Emily ran to James. Does this mean you're officially my dad? Yeah, sweetheart, officially. Sarah took Emily's hand. Our dad. Thanksgiving marked their first holiday as an official family. James hosted at his house, since Elizabeth's mansion felt too formal, too much like an obligation instead of a celebration. He'd been up since 5 preparing Jennifer's traditional menu: turkey, stuffing, green bean casserole, mashed potatoes from scratch. Sarah and Emily took over decorating, resulting in a table runner made from construction paper leaves and centerpieces that defied both logic and gravity. James didn't care that it looked like an elementary school craft project. His daughters had made it together, arguing over tape and giggling over inside jokes. Elizabeth arrived at noon with Margaret, who'd refused to retire before seeing this situation through. The older woman surveyed the kitchen chaos with her usual stern expression, but James caught her smiling when Sarah showed her the place cards Emily had calligraphed. They sat around James's battered kitchen table, 6 people who shouldn't fit together, but did anyway. Before eating, Sarah insisted on Jennifer's tradition, everyone saying one thing they were grateful for. Sarah went first. I'm grateful for my sister, even though she's annoying sometimes. Emily threw a wadded napkin at her, grinning. I'm grateful for my dad and for Sarah teaching me that families can be loud and messy and good. Elizabeth's voice was thick when she spoke. I'm grateful for second chances, for people who forgive mistakes they had every right to hold against me. Margaret surprised everyone. I'm grateful these children finally have what they needed. And for Mr. Robinson, who turned out to be exactly the man I hoped he was. James met the older woman's eyes, seeing approval there that meant more than he'd expected. I'm grateful for all of you, for family that finds each other even when the odds are impossible. 18 months passed in a blur of ordinary miracles. The treehouse reached completion in January. Railings, roof, pulley system, all finished, with both girls helping every step. They carved their initials in the main beam, JRSREHR. James added the date and the words, Robinson family, built together. Elizabeth moved the foundation branch to Portland, bought a house across town. She came for dinner 3 times a week, learning to cook badly while the girls giggled. Gradually, she got better. The Ice Queen CEO learned to crack eggs without getting shell everywhere, to flip pancakes without sending them to the ceiling, to measure her worth by laughter instead of spreadsheets. The girls became actual sisters, fighting over bathroom time, borrowing each other's clothes, developing the kind of shorthand that comes from shared secrets and mutual understanding. Emily's anxiety attacks became rare, then stopped entirely. Sarah's guard came down slowly but surely until the day James heard her teaching Emily about Jennifer. Mom would have loved you. She always said family was whoever showed up and stayed. You showed up, Em. Your family. 1 year after the hardware store meeting, James stood in that same aisle with both daughters, buying supplies for the garden shed they'd decided to build next. The girls walked ahead, arguing about whether they needed more nails or if Dad's estimate was accurate. Emily turned back, her voice carrying, "Dad, Sarah says we're overbuying, but I calculated the surface area, and we definitely need 3 more boxes." Sarah rolled her eyes. She calculated wrong. Dad's estimate is always right. A woman passed with a small child, doing a double take at the identical mannerisms, the way both girls tilted their heads when arguing, the stubborn set of their jaws, the hand gestures that were pure James. Are they twins? Sarah and Emily looked at each other and burst out laughing. No, we're just sisters. We have the same dad, but different moms. It's complicated, but good complicated. The woman looked confused, but smiled politely before moving on. James joined his daughters, putting a hand on each shoulder. So, how many boxes of nails do we actually need? 3 more. Dad's original estimate. How about we compromise and get 2 more? Both girls groaned at the dad logic, but agreed. At the register, Emily pulled out money from her allowance. Her idea, wanting to contribute to family projects instead of just letting Dad pay for everything. Sarah matched her dollar for dollar, competitive even about generosity. That evening, Elizabeth came for dinner, a regular occurrence now. She'd learned to make spaghetti without burning the sauce, could crack eggs with only occasional shell, had stopped flinching when the girls bickered. They ate together, trading stories about their days. After dinner, James and Elizabeth handled cleanup, developing a rhythm. She washed, he dried, both comfortable in silence that used to be awkward, but was now just peaceful. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I'd told you from the beginning? Elizabeth asked it quietly, not looking up from the dish she was scrubbing. James thought about alternate timelines, the ones where he'd known about Emily from birth, where maybe he'd never married Jennifer, where Sarah might not exist. None of those versions felt right. I think we got here the long way around, made a mess, hurt each other, probably traumatized our kids in ways they'll unpack in therapy someday. Elizabeth laughed, despite herself. But we're here now. Both girls are happy. They have each other. We're figuring it out. Maybe that's enough. You really think so? That all the pain and mistakes were worth it? James looked toward the living room where his daughters sat shoulder to shoulder, Emily helping Sarah with math homework while Sarah translated word problems into concepts Emily's formal education had somehow missed. Ask me in 10 years, but right now? Yeah, I think it was worth it. Later that night, alone in his workshop, James finished the small carved phoenixes he'd started months ago. 3 of them, 1 for each daughter, 1 for himself. Emily's was walnut, rich and deep. Sarah's was cherry, warm and familiar. His was oak, solid and weathered. Different materials, same to design, stronger together than apart. He set them on his workbench, 3 phoenixes with wings spread, ready to fly. A year ago, he'd been a widower, raising 1 daughter alone, convinced his capacity for love had been depleted by loss. Now he had 2 daughters who bickered over bathroom time and fought over who got shotgun in his truck. He had an ex-girlfriend turned co-parent who'd become something like a friend. He had a life that didn't look anything like what he'd planned, but felt more complete than he'd imagined possible. Some families are born, some are made, and some are torn apart and reassembled by sheer stubborn refusal to give up, by children brave enough to point at truth when they see it, by the recognition that love doesn't divide, it multiplies, making room for everyone who needs a place to belong. James Robinson, carpenter and father, traced the phoenix on his wrist one more time. Then he turned off the workshop lights and went inside to the house where his daughters slept, where tomorrow they'd wake up and fight over breakfast and build something new together. The phoenix had learned to fly again. All of them had.